Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another special episode. Can you please welcome back to the channel Mr. Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. Peter, always a pleasure to have you on the channel, my friend.
Good to be back on the channel.
And today's show is going to be a bit of a rant, which is not something I've really done much of before. I wanted to do an episode about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I didn't want to do the same episode that most other people do, which is sort of like, oh, this band should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that sort of thing. Or this band shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Why is this rap band in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? All that sort of thing. I don't want to go down that road at all. What I wanted to look at instead, because I've always found it interesting, was bands that have been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but certain members were excluded from that induction. Because for those of you who may not know, when a band gets inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they select which members are actually being inducted, and it's not necessarily all of them. So we're going to look at some bands where we think members of this band were unfairly snubbed from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and we think they should be in there along with their bands. So Peter, let's get straight into it. We're going to pick three each, and we might have some honorables at the end. So, Peter, what's the first band that you think left out somebody really important from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Well, this is, as I would say, a total head scratch, and it's Deep Purple. So first and foremost, they've been treated very badly with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were eligible to be in the Hall of Fame in 1994, and it took them 22 years, which is a ridiculously long period of time considering the influence. They're one of the godfathers of hard rock and heavy metal. They're like part of the holy trinity of British hard rock. Bicyclelegs, you'd have to put them up there with Zepp and Sabbath. But sadly, took them a long time. They finally got inducted in 2016, and it was basically the Mark II lineup and a bit of the Mark III. But the biggest omission of all was they put a bit of a sniff out for the Mark I lineup, and they inducted Rod Evans. But there was another guy that played in that Mark I lineup, the bass player, Nick Simper, and they ignored him. Why? That's just inexplicable. I've got a theory on it. So the induction was Rod Evans, Richie Blackmore, John Lord, Ian Pace, Ian Gillan, Roger Glover, so that you've got Mark I, Mark II, and then Mark III, David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. Now, I think they put Rod Evans because Rod Evans has been missing in action for a considerable period of time. He was part of a bogus Deep Purple band in 1980, Bicyclelegs. That did a bit of a tour of North America, Mexico. He got sued, gave up all rights to any royalties with Deep Purple, and he's been missing in action ever since, never been cited. There's been rumours abound that he works in the medical industry, became a doctor or something along those lines, but hasn't been cited. I think it's very cynical. They threw a bone at the Mark I lineup, so he may surface, and wow, we've got Rod Evans. But they completely ignored Nick Simper, who's the bass player. Deep Purple had a hit, with Hush, that went top 5 in America. The first album sold really well. They were a bit of a psych band. They were not the hard rock, heavy metal Goliaths from In Rock onwards, but nevertheless, it is a very notable omission that, you pick the singer, but you don't pick the bass player, and you pick all the lineups subsequent. And I'll get into another snub in a moment. So, what do you think? It just doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. And as you know, Peter, I have a soft spot for Mark I Deep Purple.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy it. And yeah, it's never like I would have thought if they were going to snub one of those two guys, it would have been Rod Evans because of all the bad blood that's, gone down with that bogus Deep Purple that happened. But no, I
I,
have no idea why Nick Simper got left out.
Absolutely, he's part of the sound. He was part of the original Deep Purple. I mean, when they were forming the band before they laid down tracks and you know, sort of the genesis, and he didn't get selected. So I think it was a very cynical move by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to flush out Rod Evans for the show, because a lot of this, folks, is for the show.
Hmm.
I've got this theory that a lot of the acts that get selected, yeah, part of it is about influence and worthiness, but another part of it is selling tickets, selling subscriptions, and putting on a show. And wouldn't it be spectacular if this guy that was part of this big bogus scam of the 80s hasn't been cited, and he's up there with Bobby Gentry of the biggest whatever happened to surfaces and turns up in New York, as if that was ever going to happen. So
Hmm.
that's all part of it. Other partial snubs, Tommy Bolin. I think that Come Taste the Band is a brilliant album. It's grown a lot of legs over time. I think its reputation has sort of grown in stature since 1976. It wasn't really revered in the day, but I think over time it's way up there in the discography of Deep Purple. And I think it would have been a great way to honor Tommy Bolin with his other work, because he is revered as a great guitarist and a kind of legend in the jazz fusion. And I think by giving him a nod by Deep Purple, by default, it would have been a nod to his other works as well.
Yeah.
And also, I think a big snub to Steve Morse, who has played in the band or played in the band longer than Richie Blackmore, and has given considerable service through the 90s and the 2000s, and really was kind of the glue that held, that got Deep Purple as a viable touring act again. Again, if they honoured him, by default, they'd be honouring his works with Kansas and Dixie Dregs, and he is a guitarist that is very highly revered. So I think that's a huge snub. Um, Rolling, I say Rolling Stone, Jan Wiener. I think a lot of
Hmm.
them are very focused on the classic lineups, and I think they miss the point that they've got to look at the bigger picture. And a lot of these artists that have been snubbed actually held the band together and made them a viable recording act, and in some cases, a very steady uh, sort of record selling sort of viable act. I mean, in Europe, I know that Deep Purple sold big numbers. But it's all very American centric. It's what happens in America, and doesn't sort of really look at what's happening in Europe. And I've got a theory about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that there are some bands that are treated quite favourably, and there are some that maybe not be in the personal iPod of the board themselves, and they make it a little bit difficult, and that's why they have these little caveats and little rules.
Yeah.
For example, you've got the Grateful Dead, who've had hundreds of members. And, I find their music boring as batshit, but I'll park that to the side. I understand they're influential, um, you know, uh, as a jam band, but they basically had everybody inducted. And, you know, sort of bands like Deep Purple, there are some notable omissions,
Yeah.
and they're all part of the story, and they got snubbed. So there seems to be a bit of an inequality. And the biggest criticism of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is its personal tastes
Yeah.
more than influence, more than popular culture, and recognizing those bands that did influence popular culture.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it definitely is about, it's not just about a personal taste thing too. I think it's also about a very much a critic's taste, as opposed to, what the fans are into and that sort of thing. I think a lot of bands that are very, very popular with the fans have gotten treated shabbily by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, whereas some of those bands that are more critics' darlings, get in there a lot more easily, and more of their members get inducted with them, and
Yeah,
all that sort of thing.
they are getting better because there are
Mm,
bands like Bon Jovi. I mean, in the first 10 years of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I mean, I would imagine Jan Wiener would have said, "Not over my dead body will bands like Bon Jovi or Kiss get in, for that matter."
mm,
But I think over time there's been a rotation of different people. I think Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine is a member, and he's been very proactive and in getting a lot of championing a lot of the hard rock and heavy metal bands to get recognised, because you'll see through my choices, it's one particular genre of music that seems to be neglected and falls into this rant and
yeah.
this show. They are getting better, but the ones that they sort of grudgingly, and you can see through gritted teeth, they'll allow in, they just put these caveats. And to me, it means we'll let you in, but we're going to just put some rules. We're
Mm.
not letting everybody in.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into my first choice, I think, because this is a band that had been eligible for the longest time. It took well over 20 years after their eligibility for them to be inducted. And then when they were inducted, they only inducted the 7 original members of the band. And the band I'm talking about is Chicago. Now, some people, I think a lot of the critics think of Chicago as just the syrupy ballads from the 80s and that sort of thing. They were a great rock and roll band in the 70s, and they had tremendous success in the 80s. So again, it's one of those things where um it's the people's choice, because this was a band that was having hit after hit after hit for year after year after year, and they just got snubbed over and over again by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But when they finally inducted Chicago into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they inducted the original 7 members and nobody else. And in particular, there's 3 guys I think got badly, badly snubbed. One of them is their percussionist, Lauder de Oliveira. He played with them. He was on Chicago 6 and 7 as a side musician, and then he became a full member of the band and played with them from Chicago 8 all the way through to Chicago 14. So he was on some of their most successful albums. He was also there in a bit of a dip in their career as well. But he uh, was a vital uh, cog in the machine, because he changed their sound and gave it this more Latin feel in the second half of the 70s. And I think that's really, really important. But the two I think that really got snubbed, Bill Champlin and Jason Scheff. Now, Bill Champlin joined the band for Chicago 16, which was their big, big commercial comeback, had the huge hit Hard to Say I'm Sorry on it. But Bill Champlin came in, and he was the rough voice. He was the gritty voice, the soulful voice that the band had been missing since the late great Terry Kath had died. And he gave Chicago that edge again in some of their songs, and a soulfulness that absolutely I think gets overlooked. And he stayed with the band for 20 odd years after that. And then Jason Schaff came in and replaced one of the most vital members in Peter Cetera. You know, he became their new tenor lead singer. He became their bass player. He was important. He wrote some of their biggest hits in the second half of the 80s. He sang some of their biggest hits in the second half of the 80s. And I'm not just talking about, I'm talking about songs that went to #1 on the US Billboard chart. And again, he stayed with the band for well over 20 years, gave them faithful service, kept them as a touring act, because Chicago to this day, still play, well over 100 dates every year, which I think is just incredible for a band that's been going for, you know, almost 60 years now, because they started in 1967. So, and So yeah, these three guys really contributed to the band in important ways, both creatively and commercially. And they just didn't get recognized. Jason Sheff did play as part of their induction ceremony, so that was something. So he got to get up on stage, but he didn't get the trophy that he really, really deserved as part of the band. Laudir de Oliveira had sadly passed away by this stage. Bill Champlin had already left the band, but still, these three guys, but especially Bill and Jason, should definitely have been recognized and inducted into the Hall of Fame with the rest of Chicago.
It's like you're having Christmas dinner, and you've got the kids' table over there, and they're sitting
Mm,
over in that table. Poor those poor guys. They're going to the induction ceremony, played on those albums, but oh look, sorry, you can't come up and get the award, but you got to sit over there, and that
yeah.
that totally
And
sucks.
again, Jason Sheff was in the band longer than Peter Cetera was. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's,
look, when you were talking, I was thinking, you know, ideally it should be the band gets inducted instead of this
mm,
bullshit about individuals. And I was thinking maybe they're doing it because of economics, but then it comes back to bands like the Grateful Dead. I'm sorry, I keep on coming back where everybody gets inducted. I've heard that the ticket prices are quite expensive. I hear that if you have to go to the show and you're a performer, you've got to pay your own way. It's not
mm,
cheap. It's they don't subsidize you, so it's like you've got to go into your wallet and and lay down some money to actually go to this award ceremony. I don't know. I think it's just arbitrary. I just think it comes down to whether they really like you, they'll wrap your arms around you,
yeah.
and you can come to the show. But if they don't, if they're grudgingly, they've come in, we're going to put some
Yeah.
caveats.
And just to give a little teaser for the end of this episode, I'm actually going to share one band where I think there was one member that was inducted, and I don't know why they were inducted. So that should be an interesting sort of turnaround on this. Um, you know,
Absolutely. And I might, at the end of the show, I might even put a counterpoint. Just throw me, who do you think should be, just name a band that should be in there but aren't. That should be pretty
mm.
easy. We could just rattle. I've got one in my head. So,
Oh yeah,
if you
same.
don't mind, just, yeah,
Yeah, no, that's fine.
yeah.
So what's your second example?
Well, I think Kiss.
Yeah.
Look, I do get why they did the four. They are the four originals. They're the recognizable characters. But there is a case that there was some members of that band that carried the brand and carried them as a viable recording and concert act for the duration of Kiss's career. So I'm talking about Eric Carr. I'm talking to Bruce Kulick in the 80s. I'm talking about Vinnie Vincent, and I'll come back to him. People go, well, Vinnie Vincent, um, and maybe to a lesser extent Tommy Thayer, who was right at the end. But I look, they're on the ropes around the Elder, um, unmasked. They did the Lick It Up album. Vinnie Vincent comes in, and even for that one album, his songwriting contributions turned that band around, and it became a little bit of a hit. It sold more units than the previous Kiss albums. Like those albums, Unmasked, big hit in Australia, but around the rest of the world, Bicycle Legs, it was a flop. They didn't even
Mm.
tour America. Maybe they did. Maybe they just
They
did
played one show.
one show. So
Yeah.
Kings of Australia and Brazil, but anywhere around the rest of the world, they could barely get arrested. So they took the makeup off, and look, there were some steady players in the 80s, whether you like it or not. Bruce Kulick, Eric Carr, and to a lesser extent, Vinnie Vincent, and then in the 2000s, Tommy Thayer. Um, So I just think it's viable. You've got to acknowledge those guys for keeping it alive. But again, this is an example where it's evident, and it's on record where Jan Wiener has said that he doesn't like Kiss, and there's been some other folks in that hierarchy that said over my dead body, but there was a change. They got in, and they've just put some very strict caveats on it. And I seem to recall there was a bit of a hoo-ha that they only wanted the original four to perform on the night of the induction. So
Hmm.
Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons said, "Well, we'll just turn up and just collect the award. If they won't let the current band play." And there was a lot of divisions. There was a lot of issues between the band because they did make a comeback in '96, the original
Yeah.
four, but it started to deteriorate, and there still was a lot of acrimony. Obviously, I think Paul and Gene wanted to play with the band that they were currently with. Eric Singer's another one I didn't mention,
Hmm.
the drummer right at the end. Um, but I think the I seem to recall that the committee said no, it's got to be the original four are going to be performing on that night. So that's another thing. Not only they're controlling who gets to the award, who gets to play, and perhaps might even go further as to what you're actually going to play.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think? Kiss? It's got to be up
Yeah.
there.
No, look, I absolutely look. I'm one of these people where two of my absolute favorite Kiss albums are Creatures of the Night and Lick It Up, and they're the two that Vinny was most involved with. He was a little bit involved in the songwriting with Revenge as well, but those two he played on, he wrote on. I love those albums to bits, but especially Eric Carr and Bruce Kulick, I think, were done dirty by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they were long-standing members of that band. They played on a bunch of albums. They kept the band going, touring. You know, it was just, yeah, those two in particular. I can see the case for Vinny. I can see. I'm not sure I quite see the case for Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer. I mean, yeah, they did do those
To a
couple of
lesser,
albums.
I
Yeah,
mean, I've got a kumbaya sort of attitude to this.
yeah.
I put my
No, no,
arms
fair
around
enough.
everybody. Come in, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I do acknowledge it's a lesser. But those dudes in
yeah,
the '80s,
yeah. But
they've
Eric
been really
Carr,
ripped off.
yeah, Eric Carr and Bruce Kulick were done dirty. There's no two ways about it.
Absolutely, and I can only suggest that look, I don't think they like Kiss, but I
Mm,
think they really despise Kiss in the '80s, and by them giving the gong to those folks that played on those albums would be blessing hair metal. And I
yeah.
think hair metal is at the bottom of the pile of anything to do with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know what I
Mm,
mean? So
yeah,
metal's right at the bottom, but hair metal's like right at the bottom. And by them, blessing those two guys like Carr and Kulak by default would be blessing hair metal. That's
yeah,
my theory.
absolutely. Well, another genre I think gets the short shrift from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is progressive rock. There are a few progressive rock bands in there now, but it took a long time for any of them to get in. And the first one that did get in was Genesis, and even then, they could have been being as much inducted for their sort of 80s pop phase as they were for the progressive rock music they did in the 70s. The band I want to pick as my second band that I think a band member got done absolutely dirty on is Yes. Now, when Yes were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they actually did induct 8 members of Yes, which is actually a decently large amount of members to induct. They inducted basically the classic lineup of Yes, your John Anderson, Chris Squire, Rick Wakeman, Alan White, Steve Howe. They inducted Bill Bruford, and then they inducted from the 90125 era of Yes, Tony Kaye and Trevor Rabin. All absolutely worthy and deserving members to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the guy they left out that I think was absolutely robbed was their original guitar player, Peter Banks. Peter Banks played on those first two Yes albums, without which there would not be a Yes. More than that, Peter Banks defined the sound. You listen to what those first two records sound like, and Peter Banks is very important to the sound of those first two records. And then you listen to what Steve Howe does on, say, the Yes album, and it's definitely a continuation of what Peter Banks was doing. Steve Howe would then go off into all sorts of, wild and wonderful places with his guitar playing. But on that first record, he's definitely a continuation from what Peter Banks was doing. And most importantly, and I think this is unforgivable, Peter Banks is the man who came up with the name Yes.
No.
Yeah,
Really?
yes.
Yes.
And he got snubbed.
It was almost like an Abbott and Costello routine. Yes.
Yeah.
Who's on first? What's on? Yeah, look. I don't know.
It's a disgrace.
It's a head scratch. I don't know. I can't explain it. How many members were in the band? Are
Oh,
they,
goodness.
is that like a 30, 40?
Don't not quite, but I think it probably into about 20. So there's been a lot of members. And some of those were only on for an album and
Yeah.
and
Yep.
that sort of thing. But no, Peter Banks, he's the one that absolutely got done dirty. I may talk about another member of Yes that I think should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but not for Yes, for
Yeah.
another band that he was in.
Yeah,
So
Prog is near the sewer. Is up down in the sewer with metal and hair metal and a lot of those genres.
yeah.
They've been very slow. ELP,
Nope,
they've
they're
never
not in.
been given the gong. King Crimson. I
No,
mean, that first King's Crimson album is one of the most influential prog albums or rock
it's
albums.
a genre defining album.
Absolutely. No. So who? Rush?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
And who
Genesis,
else?
but other
Genesis.
than
Yep.
that,
That's
yeah.
it. That's lame. We're pausing because the viewers will just be racking their heads and thinking, "Gee,
Yeah.
that's just ridiculous." All right.
So I'm interested to see who your third choice is.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go Black Sabbath
Mm,
on the basis that, look, another one that they weren't very quick to inaugurate. Considering, like in the 90s, Sabbath, or the late 90s, with grunge, Sabbath's stocks had risen. And, they had a comeback with the original Awesome Foursome. A lot of bands like your Soundgardens, your Nirvanas were citing Black Sabbath as an influence. And it took them to 2006 to get the gong, but it was only the four. Ronnie James Dio, perfect
mm,
opportunity. Look, if you don't want to acknowledge the work of Dio in Rainbow, if that's a little bit too genre obscure for the popular masses, or even the Dio band, Dio, as in the 80s, which was a big draw card in America and UK and Europe in the 80s, then at least recognize him for Sabbath. Now, Sabbath were on the ropes. Never Say
mm.
Die. I love the album, but that was at the nadir of their sales. They were flatlining. They weren't almost not really a recording or touring entity. Dio came into the band and resurrected them with the wonderful Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, Live Evil, and, if anything, it solidified the legend of Ronnie James Dio as being one of the premium heavy metal vocalists of all time. So it was a perfect opportunity, but I think they were just very centered on the four. There's another element to this. There's a certain manager of the singer. Maybe there might have been some strong arming that we will not turn up and perform or do anything if that other guy's going to be there. And it could have been a little bit awkward, but it would have made great television. Can you imagine? Ozzy, Dio. There are other singers in the band. You've got the Tony Martin era. You've got Ian Gillan, which I wonderfully love, but it was reviled in the day. It's an album, Born Again, which is got a lot of critical legs at the moment. There's some other eras, but I just think Dio, that really kept the band alive. And it's sort of like, it goes back to Kiss and Deep Purple, these hard rock bands where they have a change of personnel, but they just focus on that one particular lineup. What do you think, Dio?
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely should have been, as you said with one of your other picks, it would have been a way to, I think it was Steve Morse you were talking about, it would have been a way to acknowledge the work he did with Rainbow, the work he did with the Dio band, as well as the work that he did with Black Sabbath, because I think for all of that, Ronnie James Dio should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Absolutely 100%.
And that was that was the best chance he would have got in it, because I don't think he'd get in through Dio or Rainbow, because individually by themselves probably didn't have the necessary clout.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just mention one thing too. I rather like Never Say Die as well. I think maybe I'll have to invite you back on the channel at some stage to do a in defense of that album.
Oh, absolutely. I've done one on my channel with Reed Little. We were waxing lyrical about it. Look, there are some very well-known musical commentators on big channels. We won't mention them, and they absolutely hate the album. I don't get it. I think it's wildly inventive, but from a record selling point of view, it was like they were going, they're on the downward spiral, and Dio definitely picked them up.
I will say this much: I think it's 100 times better album than Technical Ecstasy.
Oh my God, I agree with you. I'll be defending it, so it won't be a friendly argument. It'll be in defense.
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alrighty. Yeah. No, great choice. The third one I'm going to choose, and I've got a few others that I'll quickly rattle off towards the end, but Fleetwood Mac. Now, Fleetwood Mac, they did induct quite a number of members again. You had the original Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green and Danny Kerwin and Jeremy Spencer. They all got inducted. And then, of course, you had, the lineup with Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. In between those two lineups, though, in a very important period of the band where they could have gone belly up and we would never have had the, Buckingham Nicks lineup of Fleetwood Mac, there was a very, very important guy by the name of Bob Welsh. And he did not get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that is just despicable as far as I'm concerned. Because, sure, those records weren't selling the massive hotcakes that they would sell with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. But as I said, if you did not have that Bob Welsh era where he made like 5 or 6 albums, I think, with the band, there would have been no Buckingham Nicks era of Fleetwood Mac, and we would never have got that 1975 self-titled album. We never would have got Rumours. We never would have got Tango in the Night. All massive, massive sellers. And it's just absolutely, it's not just a head scratch to me. I feel like it's a deliberate diss on this guy, that they didn't induct him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I don't know why they did, other than just vindictiveness. So yeah, that's I don't know that there's a lot more I've got to say about that. I own a number of those Bob Welsh era records, and they're actually really, really good. So if you don't know that period of the band, you only know the early bluesy stuff, or you know the Buckingham Nicks era of the band, go and check out some of that stuff with Bob Welsh on it, because there's some really, really good music on there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I found,
absolutely terrible that he didn't get inducted.
and by default, it would have rewarded his solo career, Ebony Eyes,
Mm,
which was
yeah,
a bit of a hit in certain parts of the world. Definitely over here, wasn't it?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think that was a song he had recorded originally with Fleetwood Mac. So,
yeah, absolutely. Look, I can see it's a transitional period from Peter Green, the mid, the early 70s to before 75 with Welch, and then into the Buckingham Nicks era. So
mm,
you can see the progression.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of people can't see that. A
Mm,
lot of people sort of get a little bit puzzled. How can it be this nifty little blues band in the late 60s and turn into something that's all, uh, uh, you know, something completely different with Rumours? Bob Welch era.
yeah,
That's the key.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I have got
So,
one that I want to quickly rattle off, and I know you've got about
yep,
seven. So
no, not
this is
quite, but
yeah. Um, this is probably going off on a little bit of a tangent. Look, Prince, wonderful,
mm,
wonderful, one of my favorite artists of all time. He got inducted basically straight off the bat, but in some shape or form, they should induct or give recognition to the revolution, because as
yes,
far as I'm concerned, they're up there with the E Street Band, probably in even my humble opinion, better than the E Street Band. Um, those albums, Purple Rain, Around the World in a Day, Parade, um, Prince, he's a musical genius, but boy, oh boy, he had a wonderful band, and they all played their part, and they were just part of the soup, part of the mix.
mm,
And yeah, it's a bit sad that they've never got the nod. So maybe I think there's this weird category called the Sidemen category,
mm,
and I know the E Street Band has had it. I don't know. I'm segueing it into this show because I think they should get recognised and they haven't.
yeah, no, absolutely. At least there is a possibility somewhere down the track for that to happen, because there is precedent for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to induct some of these backing bands in their own right. So, yeah, so hopefully, fingers crossed, that might happen at some
Yeah,
stage.
and they still tour.
Yeah.
Certain three-quarters of the band they tour Europe, UK. I follow them on Facebook. Be great if they could come down to Australia, and they play Prince songs. And apparently, there's a vault full of albums. There's at least 3 or 4 albums that they recorded with Prince in the Purple Rain era that are sitting in the vault. And
Mm,
you know, we were through the press. We were told that there were hundreds and hundreds of albums, but it's been a bit slow, hasn't it? Bicycle
mm,
Legs. There was an initial flurry, but it's gone to a trickle. You don't really hear much stuff coming out.
yeah. No. That's an excellent call. Excellent call.
That's all I've got for this show. But I'll
Yep.
be interested to hear what these other
I
ones.
I've got just a couple of others, because you mentioned a few of the ones that I had on my longer list anyway, so
Yeah.
which I knew would happen, so that's fine. Um, the other two I want to mention are the Electric Light Orchestra, because with ELO, only four members got inducted, one of them being Roy Wood, which I do understand why Roy Wood was inducted, because he was in the original band, but he only stuck around for that first album. So,
And we were just talking about the guitarist from Yes.
yeah.
So
So,
it doesn't make sense,
yeah,
does it?
exactly. But then there were two much more longer term members of the band, Mick Kaminsky and Kelly Grokert. And they played on all those sort of classic ELO albums like Out of the Blue and Face the Music and you know, and they got snubbed, and I think that was unforgivable. And then the other one I was alluding to when I was talking about Yes, this was a guy who played on one Yes album that is very highly regarded within the Yes community. If people have seen my Yes ranking, I don't regard it quite so much, but he played for several albums and several years with the Moody Blues, and that is Patrick Moraz. Great keyboard player. He played with the Moody Blues basically throughout the 80s when they were having hit after hit with things like Gemini Dream and Your Wildest Dreams and I Know You're Out There Somewhere and having these big hit albums and doing lots of big smash hit tours. And then he got done dirty by the band because they kind of sacked him halfway through an album. So I think that's probably why he didn't get in, is probably more interference from the band than interference from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame itself. But still,
Mm.
I think it was absolutely a travesty that Patrick Moraz was not inducted into the Moody Blues when they were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I did promise I would have one opposite example where somebody got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with their band, and I don't understand why. This might come controversial to you, Peter, I don't know, but I will explain myself. And it's when The Cure got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one of the members that got inducted was Reeves Gabrels. And at the time that they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he had not played on a single Cure album. Not one. So how does that work? I mean, I'm not having a go at Reeves Gabrels. I love the work he did with Bowie in the 90s and all that sort of stuff. Fantastic player. I do love the work that he did on that new Cure album, Songs of a Lost World. He's great on that album, but that album hadn't come out when the Cure were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well,
And yet he got inducted having basically never played on a Cure album. So
maybe
how
they
does
heard.
that work?
Well, maybe they heard the tapes. Maybe they were given a sneak preview a couple of years ahead. No, that's ridiculous, isn't it? I think somebody hadn't done their research.
Mm, absolutely.
Probably looked at a Wikipedia page,
Well, you know
which
what I
is not
think?
always accurate.
Yeah, you know what I think? I think it's one of those Grateful Dead kind of things where they just basically said, let's induct everybody. And
Mm,
so, yeah, so they just got a list of everyone who'd ever been a member of The Cure
yeah.
and inducted them all. So there you have it, everyone. Those are our thoughts of band members who've been viciously snubbed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for one reason or another. Please let us know in the comments if you've got any examples of band members who got snubbed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because we would love to see that.
And you're
Yes,
going to tell
Peter.
me about one band. Remember, you're going to tell me one band you think should be inaugurated and has been snubbed. So
Absolutely.
I'll put up my hand and say INXS. It's about time.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it will come as no surprise either to you, Peter, or my regular viewers when I say that the band that I think absolutely should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is Devo.
Devo.
Because so influential, just so influential, and I think influence has got to be as much a category for inducting people into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as record sales is. And I mean, it is. You look at people like Lou Reed who've been inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He never sold a lot of records, but he was wildly influential, you know? So, yeah. So, yeah, Devo for me should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And one of these days, hopefully, it will happen. And they're Ohio natives too. So they live just down the road from, or they did just live down the road from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So,
Yeah, well, they've got close. They've been on the nomination sheet, but INXS haven't even got on the nomination sheet. And
yeah,
I just think, from my perspective, that people seem to forget they were a multi-platinum hit-making sort of artists. They sold a ton of records all around the world, and they're sort of forgotten. And hopefully with Listen Like Feeds getting a bit of traction as a remaster, people will fall in love with the band again, and they get the nod. But yeah, Devo, I agree. B-52s, that's another one.
Yeah,
Wildly influential. I mean, we could go
absolutely.
into a whole different show, but I just wanted to, quickly put it out there.
Absolutely. So, Peter, thanks so much for doing the show. It's been a
Pleasure.
lot of fun. And if any of my viewers are not already subscribed to Rock Daydream Nation, which I find very hard to believe, by the way, um, go and rectify that right now. I will leave a link into the description, as I always do. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other special episodes, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my sequel to success shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, like Rock Daydream Nation, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.